Picture the terrifying paradox of Israel's first monarchy. I mean, the nation begs for a king to fight their battles, right? They demand this visible, undeniable security against the Philistine threat.
Yeah, they want a physical guarantee.
Exactly. And what do they actually receive? A paranoid monarch who uses his standing army not to protect the innocent, but to slaughter 85 of God's own priests at the sanctuary of Nob.
It's just a horrific betrayal of the whole concept.
It is. It's a king who, in the dead of night, disguises himself to consult an outlawed medium at Endor because the heavens have gone completely silent.
Right.
And he ends his reign not in some blaze of protective glory, but as a headless corpse nailed to a pagan fortress wall. It's a catastrophic failure. And this dark transition, meticulously recorded in the ancient text of 1 Samuel, raises a profound question.
It really does.
The establishment of the Israelite monarchy is a narrative of absolute divine rejection. It's a terrifying theological trap designed to expose the fatal flaw of human political systems.
Well, and I'll be arguing that it's actually a highly volatile story of divine accommodation. It's where God works through the messy, fragile ruins of human failure to redefine earthly power.
Redefine it how, though?
Well, the historical collapse we see in 1 Samuel, it shatters every comfortable narrative we have about biblical heroism. We are looking at a period where the visible symbols of earthly power just become instruments of national trauma.
They literally weaponize the institutions?
Exactly. But I come at it from a different way regarding the nature of this tragedy. Yes, the text is undeniably dark, but I don't think it entirely condemns the monarchy, I think it redefines it.
By tearing it down?
By exposing what it is. The tragedy of 1 Samuel isn't the throne itself, but the heart of the man sitting on it. The text strips away our sanitized view of history to show that David's chaotic, painful rise proves God can and does work within earthly political structures.
Assuming the leader actually cooperates, of course.
Right, provided the leader learns to wait on divine timing rather than seizing power by force.
I see why you want to salvage the institution, but 1 Samuel portrays human kingship as an inherent rebellion, doomed to consume the nation. The demand for a king in chapter 8 is an irredeemable betrayal.
It's definitely a bleak chapter.
It's brutal. Samuel explicitly warns the people about the functional mechanics of the institution they're begging for. He tells them a king will take. That is the verb used over and over.
Yeah, he will take your sons, your daughters.
Exactly. He'll take your sons for his chariots, your daughters for his kitchens, the best of your fields to reward his cronies. The institution itself is the villain here.
But the text also shows God actively choosing Saul.
But look at how it plays out violently. Saul uses religious acts as political tools. He edits God's commands to preserve his public image, and he massacres priests when his paranoia peaks.
I won't defend his later actions, obviously.
Right, but the subsequent secret anointing of David, a humble shepherd, isn't God validating the throne. It is God absolutely subverting the very institution Israel demanded.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered how actively God facilitates this supposed rebellion?
What do you mean by facilitates?
Well, if this is a pure trap designed only to punish Israel, why is God's providence orchestrating every minute detail of Saul's rise? God uses Saul's lost donkeys to physically guide him to the prophet Samuel.
It's an initiation, sure.
It's more than that. When Samuel anoints Saul, God gives him a new heart. The Spirit of the Lord rushes upon him, and his early victory rescuing the city of Jabesh-Gilead from the Ammonites, it's an entirely righteous act of liberation.
I'll grant you the early victory.
Right, so this isn't a deity abandoning his people to a purely secular fate. This is divine accommodation.
Let's look exactly at how this demand for a king unfolds at Ramago, because the geopolitical mechanics here are crucial. The elders approach Samuel, ostensibly because his sons are corrupt judges.
Which they were.
They were. But their requested solution reveals the deeper spiritual rot. They say, "Appoint for us a king to judge us like all the nations."
The desire for conformity.
Yes. And God states clearly to Samuel, "They have not rejected you. They have rejected me from being king over them." This isn't a simple political evolution. This is Israel trying to manipulate their geopolitical security.
It's definitely a lack of trust.
It's the exact same theological failure we saw earlier in the text at the Battle of Ebenezer.
Wait, you mean when they brought the Ark of the Covenant into the military camp?
Exactly. When Israel was losing to the Philistines at Ebenezer, they didn't repent. They went to Shiloh, grabbed the Ark of the Covenant, and carried it onto the battlefield, shouting so loudly the earth resounded.
Right, treating it like a talisman.
They tried to use the sacred presence of God as a magic weapon. They wanted a divine symbol they could control. And the result was the slaughter of 30,000 men and the capture of the Ark itself.
It was a complete disaster.
And demanding a king at Ramah operates on the exact same logic. They want a physical, measurable armor they can deploy.
A tangible defense.
Yeah, it's like handing the keys of your kingdom to a usurper in the shadows, just to escape the vulnerability of depending on an unseen God. They gained immediate visible security, but they completely lose the unique identity that made them successful.
I hear the analogy, and it's helpful, but I think it misses a critical piece of the narrative.
How so?
Well, even if the initial demand is flawed, God doesn't just hand them a poisoned chalice and walk away. Look at Samuel's farewell address in chapter 12.
Where he calls down the storm?
Before that, he formally introduces a new covenantal paradigm. He tells the nation that the monarchy can survive and the nation can thrive if both the king and the people fear the Lord and obey his voice.
And that's a massive if.
It is, but it's an agonizing accommodation, absolutely. But it is not an irredeemable trap. The structure of the monarchy can work if the heart of the monarch is subordinated to God.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because Samuel's speech in chapter 12 reads much more like a stay of execution than an endorsement.
A stay of execution.
Yeah. I mean, just to clarify for everyone, right after Samuel gives this supposed new paradigm, he calls down thunder and rain during the wheat harvest.
Which is unheard of in that season.
Exactly. In ancient Israel, rain during the summer wheat harvest is an unnatural, terrifying phenomenon. It threatens their entire food supply. Samuel uses this miraculous storm to physically demonstrate how wicked their request for a king was.
The people are terrified.
They actually confess, saying, "We have added to all our sins this evil, to ask for ourselves a king." The political structure itself is fundamentally incompatible with their covenant. And we see this instantly in the fall of Saul. It is an absolute inevitable trap.
Wait, inevitable? So you're arguing Saul literally never had a chance?
I am arguing the throne forces a calculation between political pragmatism and covenant obedience, and the throne always wins. Look at chapter 15, the decisive moment of rejection.
The Amalekite campaign.
Right. Saul is commanded to strike the Amalekites, but he spares King Agag and the best of the livestock. Why does he do this?
Well, he admits he feared the people and listened to their voice.
Exactly. But let's dig into why he feared them and why he spared Agag specifically. In ancient Near Eastern warfare, sparing a rival king isn't an act of mercy.
No, it's a trophy.
It's a calculated geopolitical maneuver. You keep the rival king alive to parade him around as a vassal, demonstrating your dominance.
Showing off his power.
Saul is operating like a standard ancient Near Eastern monarch. He prioritizes the optics of a victory parade. He even sets up a monument to himself at Carmel over obedience to God. The structure of the kingship demanded this kind of pragmatism.
The optics were terrible. True.
And the consequence is irreversible. God explicitly says, "I regret that I have made Saul king."
But the failure there is deeply personal, not institutional. He fails because he is a coward disguised as a king.
Just to clarify for a second, are you saying the immense pressure of holding a fractured nation together against a superior Philistine military had nothing to do with his choices?
The pressure was real, sure, but his response to it is what condemned him. Let's look at the incident at Gilgal in chapter 13, which happens before the Amalekite conflict.
When he offers the sacrifice.
Right. Saul is waiting for Samuel to arrive to offer sacrifices before battle. The Philistines are gathering in massive numbers, and Saul's army is literally scattering, hiding in caves and holes. What is the tactical benefit of Saul stepping up and offering the burnt offering himself?
It holds the army together. It's a morale play.
Precisely. He uses a sacred religious act to solve an immediate political crisis. He treats obedience as negotiable when the polling numbers drop, so to speak.
Because the system demands it.
No, that is a failure of the man's heart under pressure, not a proof that kingship itself is evil. And I can prove that the institution isn't inherently toxic using the text itself.
Okay, how?
1 Samuel deliberately contrasts Saul's paralyzing, politically pragmatic fear with the bold faith of his son, Jonathan, the literal heir to this supposedly doomed institution.
Jonathan is an interesting counterpoint, but how does he prove the monarchy can work?
Look at chapter 14. Saul is sitting on the outskirts of Gibeah under a pomegranate tree, completely paralyzed by the overwhelming Philistine military presence.
He's entirely reactive at that point.
He has the armor, he has the title, but he is completely inert. Meanwhile, Jonathan says to his armor-bearer, "Nothing can hinder the Lord from saving by many or by few."
It's an incredible statement of faith.
It is. Jonathan literally climbs up a cliff on his hands and feet to single-handedly attack a Philistine garrison, trusting God completely. If the institution of the monarchy was inherently toxic, Jonathan, the crown prince, would be just as corrupt, but he acts with incredible faith.
That's a great narrative contrast, though. I would frame Jonathan's role entirely differently.
Really? How so?
Jonathan is actually the definitive proof of my argument, precisely because he abdicates. He recognizes that true faith cannot inhabit the throne his father built.
He just recognizes David's anointing.
It's more than that. When he meets David later, Jonathan strips off his royal robe, his armor and his sword, and hands them all to David. He divests himself of the institution.
That's one interpretation.
And let's look at David, the man God secretly chooses. If God is accommodating kingship, why does David's ascent look like God actively mocking the very concept of human royalty?
Mocking? I don't see it as mocking. God is choosing a new, better king.
Look at the aesthetics, though. The elders of Israel wanted a king who was tall, taller than anyone else from the shoulders upward, a towering figure of physical security.
Saul fit the bill perfectly.
He did, but when Samuel goes to Bethlehem to anoint a new king, he looks at Jesse's oldest son, Eliab. Eliab is tall, he looks the part of a warrior.
And Samuel assumes he's the one.
Right, and God explicitly tells Samuel, do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. God bypasses the military men for the youngest brother, a shepherd.
I agree that God is subverting the human criteria for leadership, but that doesn't mean he is mocking the office itself.
But look at the kind of king David becomes in the wilderness. He is the ultimate anti-king. The anointed one of Israel spends years as a fugitive living in the cave of Adullam.
A desperate situation.
And who makes up his royal court? The text says everyone who is in distress, everyone who is in debt, and everyone who is bitter in soul gathered to him. This isn't a royal cabinet. This is a militia of outcasts and malcontents.
Yes, the text aggressively strips away David's traditional, majestic heroism.
It goes beyond stripping away heroism. It becomes absurd. To survive Saul's pursuit, David has to flee to Gath.
The enemy territory.
Gath is a Philistine stronghold. It is literally the hometown of Goliath, and David is carrying Goliath's own sword. When the Philistine lords recognize him, what does the anointed king of Israel do to survive?
He has to act crazy.
He feigns profound insanity. He scratches meaningless marks on the doors of the city gate and lets his saliva run down his beard, just so the Philistine king will dismiss him as a madman.
It's a dark moment.
It is a complete, humiliating deconstruction of the regal, dignified, forceful monarch the elders demanded at Ramah. God is showing that earthly kingship is a farce.
It is a profound deconstruction of aesthetic kingship. Yes, I'll give you that. But I come at the purpose of that humiliation from a completely different angle.
Which is?
The wilderness isn't God proving that the throne is radioactive. The wilderness is the brutal, agonizing, but absolutely necessary training ground for true Israelite leadership. Training by drooling on a beard?
You see a humiliated madman at Gath. I see a terrified, exhausted human being who is being systematically purged of the instinct to rely on his own strength. God is forging a leader who will not seize power by assassination.
But the text shows him constantly on the verge of doing exactly that.
Wait, let's look at the evidence of his restraint. Look at the deep theological implications of David sparing Saul at the cave of En-Gedi.
When he cuts the robe?
Exactly. Saul wanders into a cave to relieve himself, completely unaware that David and his men are hiding in the recesses of that exact cave. David's men whisper to him, "This is the day the Lord spoke of."
They want him to strike. They are offering him a theological justification for a political assassination. David creeps up and cuts off a corner of Saul's royal robe. But even that symbolic violence strikes his conscience. He refuses to put out his hand against the Lord's anointed.
He does it again later, doesn't he?
Yes, at the hill of Hitchelah. David and his nephew Abishai creep into Saul's military camp at night while a deep, unnaturally heavy sleep from the Lord has fallen on the entire army. Saul is completely exposed.
It's the perfect setup.
Abishai practically begs David, offering to pin Saul to the ground with his own spear. He says, "One strike, no second blow needed." The pragmatism of the throne is begging David to take it.
Right.
But David refuses. He takes Saul's spear and his water jar, the symbols of his life and leadership, but leaves the man alive. The wilderness is teaching David that God's promise does not give him the right to use sin as a shortcut. He is learning the exact opposite of Saul's pragmatism at Gilgal.
I hear you emphasizing his restraint, but David's restraint is incredibly fragile, which further proves my thesis. The pursuit of power is inherently corrupting, no matter who you are.
Fragile? He passed the tests.
You point to En-Gedi and Hatchalah, but what about Nabal? In chapter 25, right in the middle of this supposed training ground, David runs what is essentially a mafia protection racket.
That's a bit harsh.
It's true. He sends messengers to Nabal, a wealthy sheep shearer, asking for provisions because David's armed men had protected Nabal's shepherds in the wilderness.
And Nabal responds by insulting David's lineage.
Right. Nabal sneers, "Who is the son of Jesse?" dismissing David as a runaway slave. And how does the righteous, patient, wilderness-trained David react?
He loses his temper.
He reacts with the exact same murderous paranoia we saw in Saul. He doesn't pray. He doesn't wait on divine timing. He snaps.
He definitely prepares for violence.
David tells his men to strap on their swords. He straps on his own sword, and 400 armed men march out to slaughter Nabal and every innocent male in his entire household. Over what? A bruised ego and a denied payment.
It's a critical failing, yeah.
David is acting exactly like an ancient Near Eastern tyrant. The wilderness hasn't perfected him. It has pushed him to the absolute brink of becoming the very monster he is fleeing.
Yes, it pushes him to the absolute brink, but he doesn't cross it. And he doesn't cross it because of the mechanism God places in his path, Abigail.
Abigail?
Abigail is the theological pivot of the entire wilderness sequence.
Explain her role for the listener. Because on the surface, she just looks like a diplomatic wife trying to save her estate.
Oh, she is far more than a diplomat. She acts as a prophet. When she hears what Nabal did, Abigail rides out to intercept David's militia.
Taking a huge risk.
Huge risk. She bows to the ground and speaks profound truth to an enraged man with a sword. She willingly takes the guilt of her foolish husband upon herself.
Right.
But more importantly, she reminds David of his divine destiny. She tells him that the Lord is making him a sure house because he fights the battles of the Lord. And she warns him not to have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless, vengeful bloodshed.
She intercepts his tyranny.
Exactly. And what does David do? He listens. He actually listens to her.
He backs down.
Kept him from blood guilt and from avenging himself with his own hand. This is the exact structural opposite of Saul.
Because Saul doubled down.
Right. When the prophet Samuel confronted Saul about the Amalekites, Saul blamed the people, justified himself, and clung to his power. When Abigail, a woman with no political power, confronts David, David repents, drops his sword, and backs down.
It's a striking contrast.
The wilderness is proving that true power requires extreme restraint and the humility to accept wise counsel. God is actively transforming a flawed, human-demanded institution by teaching its future occupant how to submit.
Submit, yes, but only after the nation is practically burned to the ground. Let's look at the final cost of this divine accommodation.
It's a heavy cost.
By the end of 1 Samuel, the transition to this monarchy has cost Israel everything. The book concludes with a catastrophic battle at Mount Gilboa.
The Philistines absolutely crushed the Israelite army.
Complete devastation.
Saul's 3 sons, including the faithful, abdicated Jonathan, are slaughtered on the battlefield. Saul himself, badly wounded by archers, falls on his own sword to avoid capture.
It is a devastating, total collapse. The army scatters, abandoning the surrounding cities to the Philistines.
And the indignity doesn't end on the battlefield. The next day, the Philistines find Saul's body. They cut off his head, strip off his armor, and fasten his decapitated body to the wall of Beth-shan.
It's gruesome.
And let's dig into the theological weight of what happens to his armor. The text says they put his armor in the temple of Ashtaroth.
The Canaanite goddess.
Yes, a goddess of war and fertility. The very armor that the Israelites demanded for their security is now a pagan trophy sitting in the temple of a foreign deity.
It's a profound irony.
The Israelites are right back where they started before they demanded a king at Ramah. Only now the devastation is absolute. The text is ruthlessly dismantling any illusion that earthly political power guarantees security. It completely exposes the danger of demanding leaders who prioritize public image, military strength, and fear over covenant faithfulness.
I will grant you that the dismantling of their geopolitical illusion is ruthless. The physical kingdom, built on the people's anxiety and Saul's pragmatism, collapses completely on Gilboa.
It fails entirely.
To collapse so that the redefined kingship, the one characterized by restraint, humility, and reliance on God, can begin.
That's a painful way to learn a lesson.
It is a highly complex, deeply painful narrative. Both of us see that 1 Samuel forces the reader to look at the horrors of leadership disconnected from God.
We definitely agree on that.
Saul's end is deeply tragic, though it's worth noting the one glimmer of grace at the very end. The valiant men of Jabesh-Gilead walk all night to take Saul's mutilated body down from that Philistine wall.
The city he saved early on.
Exactly. They honor the man who once delivered them early in his reign. The text doesn't completely erase his early moments of spirit-led grace, but it relentlessly confirms his ultimate failure. God is reshaping Israel's understanding of authority, but doing so through the agonizing crucible of suffering and obedience.
And that leaves us to grapple with a deeply disturbing reality about human nature, a reality that hasn't changed in 3,000 years.
Not at all. The elders of Israel looked at the chaotic, violent world around them and demanded a forceful, towering leader who would go out before them and fight their battles. They wanted a system they could control, a defense mechanism they could measure.
Something tangible. But what 1 Samuel reveals through the tragic arc of Saul is that when you demand a king, like all the other nations, you get exactly what you ask for, a leader who will eventually view you not as a flock to be shepherded, but as a resource to be consumed for his own preservation.
It really forces us to ask whether our modern demands for visible, forceful leadership fall into the very same ancient trap that destroyed Saul.
It does.
When we feel threatened by cultural or geopolitical shifts, we still crave the towering figure, the immediate security, the unyielding power of a monarch. But the text warns us that the truest forms of power are never forged in the public, pragmatic celebrations at Gilgal.
Where are they forged?
They are forged in the hidden, desperate wilderness of Adullam, where leaders must learn that they are not the source of their own salvation.
Exactly. It forces you to realize that sometimes demanding the visible kingdom is just handing the keys of your nation to a usurper in the shadows, locking yourself inside a burning house to escape a storm.